As you watch this, tension in the West Philippine Sea is no longer just about ships blocking each other at sea. It has moved into the sky. On a routine patrol flight, a Philippine surveillance plane operated by the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources and supported by the Philippine Coast Guard was flying over waters that Manila considers part of its own exclusive economic zone. Below them, reefs, fishing grounds, and Chinese-occupied artificial islands. Then, without warning, 3 flares shot up from Subi Reef, launched by Chinese forces toward the Philippine aircraft. The incident did not damage the plane. The mission continued. Everyone on board landed safely. But the message was loud and clear. China is raising the temperature again in the West Philippine Sea. The Philippine Coast Guard later confirmed what happened. Cameras on board the BFAR aircraft recorded video of 3 flares being fired from the Chinese-held reef toward the plane during what officials described as a lawful overflight. The flight's purpose was straightforward: monitor the marine environment, assess the status of fisheries, and check on the safety of Filipino fishermen working in the area. But for Beijing, even routine patrols inside the Philippines' internationally recognized maritime zones are treated as threats. To understand how dangerous this moment is, we need to zoom out. The West Philippine Sea, Manila's name for the portion of the South China Sea within its exclusive economic zone under international laws, one of the most contested maritime regions on Earth. In 2016, an international arbitration tribunal in The Hague ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines, saying China's sweeping 9-line claim had no legal basis. The ruling affirmed that many of the waters and features within 200 nautical miles of Luzon and Palawan are part of the Philippines' EEZ. China rejected that ruling. Instead of backing down, Beijing doubled down, turning 7 disputed reefs into massive artificial island bases. Subi Reef, where the flares were fired, is one of them. What used to be mostly submerged has become an armed outpost, complete with a runway, radar facilities, and military infrastructure. From these man-made islands, China projects power across the region. Now place a slow-moving Cessna-type Philippine patrol aircraft into this picture. It's unarmed. Its mission: observe, document, and deter illegal activities. Protect Filipino fishermen. Show the flag. It flies through airspace above waters Manila insists are within its rights. Backed by the 2016 ruling and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, below, a Chinese-held base that Beijing insists is under its control. Then the flares streak upward. On paper, flares can be labeled signals or warnings. They're not bullets. They're not missiles. No one was hit. But in a crowded, tense, heavily militarized environment, every action carries risk. A flare fired too close to an aircraft can temporarily blind pilots. It can be interpreted as a threat. And when tensions are already high, one misunderstood move can set off a chain reaction. This is not the first time China has escalated against Philippine assets in contested waters. Filipinos still remember Chinese Coast Guard ships using water cannons against Philippine boats resupplying Ayungin Shoal. They remember dangerous blocking maneuvers, laser attacks that temporarily blinded Filipino crew, and repeated radio challenges treating Filipino vessels as intruders in their own backyard. Now, the pattern has moved into the air, with flares fired at a Philippine plane carrying out a legitimate patrol. So the question millions of Filipinos are asking is simple and terrifying. Is this how a war begins? To answer that, we need to see who is watching. The United States has no territorial claim in the South China Sea, but it has a massive interest: freedom of navigation and the security of its oldest treaty ally in Asia, the Philippines. Washington has repeatedly stated that if Philippine forces, ships, or aircraft are attacked in the West Philippine Sea, the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty applies. In simple terms, a serious armed attack on a Philippine vessel or aircraft in these waters could trigger U.S. involvement. That is what makes every close call so dangerous. Flares are not live ammunition. They are not missiles. But they are a step up from pure verbal warnings. When paired with aggressive radio challenges and the presence of Chinese Navy ships, Coast Guard vessels, and suspected militia boats like the 29 spotted near Subi Reef, recently, the picture becomes clear. China is signaling its readiness to push harder while staying just below the threshold of open conflict. For Filipino fishermen, this is not a distant geopolitical chess game. It is survival. Those waters are their livelihood. Every time a patrol plane flies overhead, it's there to document intrusions, protect fishing grounds, and send a message, Hindi kayo nag-iisa. Kasama ninyo ang Pilipinas. Dito, the flares fired at that aircraft were not only aimed at metal and wings, they were aimed symbolically at the very idea that the Philippines has the right to patrol and protect its own waters. So what happens next? On one path, Manila stays firm but measured. It files diplomatic protests. It continues patrols. It documents every incident with video evidence. It works with allies like the United States, Japan, and Australia to conduct joint exercises and freedom of navigation operations. It sends a message. We will not be bullied, but we will also not pull the trigger first. On another, more dangerous path, a single miscalculation turns a flare into something worse. Imagine a future patrol where the Chinese side chooses live ammunition instead of flares, or where a reckless maneuver brings to aircraft dangerously close. One mid-air collision, one out-of-control escalation. Suddenly, a clash at sea becomes a regional crisis. The stakes are that high. But there is another layer to this story: the information war. Chinese state media and some anonymous accounts online try to portray these patrols as provocations, as if the Philippines is the one trespassing on Chinese territory. They avoid mentioning the 2016 ruling. They avoid mentioning that the aircraft was flying within what international law recognizes as the Philippines' rights. They hope that by repeating their narrative long enough, the world will forget the law and accept the facts on the water. That is why video from these patrols matters. Footage of the flares, images of Chinese vessels shadowing Philippine planes and boats. These are not just for domestic news. They are legal and diplomatic ammunition for future negotiations, future arbitrations, and future support from allies. For your viewers, especially Filipinos who feel powerless watching these events unfold, there are a few key truths to remember. First, the Philippines is not alone. The United States has publicly affirmed multiple times that its defense treaty covers attacks in the West Philippine Sea. Japan and Australia have stepped up security cooperation with Manila. The European Union and other countries have condemned aggressive actions and reiterated support for the 2016 ruling. Second, continued patrols are not optional, they are essential. If the Philippines stops patrolling out of fear, it sends a message that intimidation works. Every lawful flight, every ship that continues to operate in these waters is a statement. We have not surrendered our rights. Third, escalation is not inevitable. Crises like this have happened before elsewhere in the world, and did not always lead to war. Clear communication, strong alliances, and persistent assertion of rights can deter further aggression. As this incident with the flares shows, the margin of error is shrinking. Filipino viewers need to understand what is really happening beyond the headlines. A Philippine patrol plane on a lawful mission was fired upon with flares from a Chinese-held reef. The flight completed its mission. No one was hurt. But the act was provocative and deliberate. The West Philippine Sea remains a flashpoint where a single mistake could drag multiple countries into confrontation. This is not something happening far away. This is about our fishermen, our food security, our territory, our pride, and our future. When a flare is fired at a Philippine plane, it is not just metal in the sky. It is a challenge to our right to exist here with dignity and safety. Follow verified news. Support calls for a stronger Philippine Coast Guard and Navy, and reject defeatist narratives that say, "Wala na tayo magagawa." There is always something to do. Vote for leaders who stand firm but smart, support transparency, and stay informed. The West Philippine Sea is not just water on a map. It is part of who we are as a nation. As long as Filipino planes fly, as long as Filipino ships sail, as long as Filipino fishermen cast their nets there, the story is not over. The flares fired at our patrol plane are a warning, but they are also a reminder that the world is watching, and so are we. Like, share, and subscribe, just for drama, but to keep attention on a conflict where silence is the biggest weapon of all.